I'm going to start by apologizing. I had a 3-year-old who gave me a beautiful cold this last week, but hopefully I'm going to make it through. So good to be here. I haven't talked at Gaia for a while. I was thinking about what I could talk about this year, and I realized I probably no longer know much about machine learning because I've been CEO now for 7 years. But I do know a little bit still, but I think I learned even more about business. And the presentation is basically 2 parts. One, which is pretty much general advice for just running a business, and one half, which is related to the specifics of AI businesses. So, I mean, in some sense, business is a lot of common sense, right? I mean, there's 2 things you got to do. You got to create value, and you got to capture value. So it turns out it's not enough to just create value. You can create value by selling a service or just, doing something that someone finds useful. Capturing value is getting paid for it in a sustained way. And there are plenty of things that are valuable, but where you cannot really capture that value. So I've come to like 2 frameworks based on 2 different books for the process of creating businesses. One is called The Crux. It's a great author, Rummelt, I think. He talks about sort of the value creation process as find a critical obstacle that someone is trying to overcome that you can do something about with a focused commitment over some period of time. So basically, you want to just go out there and see, is there a massive obstacle that you may be able to overcome? So in his book, he takes the example of going to Mars, which is obviously kind of difficult. And the main obstacle with going to Mars is that rockets are single use. They are sort of fire and forget, or they used to be. And that's not a good thing. I mean, if you had to get a new car every time you go to work, it'd make commuting more expensive. So in this case, you're basically throwing a whole rocket out into space and you're not getting it back. So that's a problem. And as crazy as it sounds, someone decided to try and catch rockets with chopsticks. And it sounds made up, but it is real. And I think you can realize that if you are able to overcome such a massive obstacle, there will be value created, quite obviously. And your level of hubris when you take on these problems is maybe a personal preference, I don't know. But somehow you have to figure out some meaningful problem that you can confirm that people have. And the vast majority of early stage startup people who come to me and ask for advice, they have done way too little work on figuring out if this is an actual problem people have, or if they just have a hammer looking for a nail. I mean, it's a surprisingly high percentage that have not talked to people who will pay for things. That's confusing to me. So when you pick what the problem is that you're trying to solve, there's obviously some sort of risk-reward curve, right? So that's a salt mine, which is low reward, low risk. You just dig stuff up out of the ground. Marginally more interesting is something like McKinsey. I think it's on par with the salt mine. And then up here is the cool stuff, right? Like SpaceX. Much higher risk, much higher reward, right? So I think there's something weird about this curve, because most people think there's some sort of linear relationship between risk and probability of success. But I found that something weird happens at the end of that risk thing. It probably looks more like this, maybe. I'm not 100% sure about this, so I might be going out on a limb. But I think that probability of success goes down with risk until a certain point where it actually goes up again, and then it suddenly collapses again. And the tricky part is finding that thing there that is inspiring, but not too far. I think when you try and take on building a company, that's the triangle you want to be in. The first half, actually building a really simple thing, can be harder than you might think because it's too easy in some sense. So basically the simple logic here in the first part is ask people about problems, find how many who have it and what they're willing to pay. And then you can decide sort of how much risk and probability of success do you need. Pretty straightforward. The second part is how do you capture value? So this brings us to a different book called 7 Powers. So capturing value is about creating conditions for persistent differential returns, which is the same as saying making money for a long time. So he made this beautiful thing. And I lack self-preservation, so I put it up here. This is the 7 Powers framework. I'm going to give you kind of a 30-second version, and then you have to read for yourself because we don't have time for all of it. But basically, there are a couple of ways that you can place your company or position your company in terms of what your source of profit is. You can be a scale economy company like Walmart or IKEA. So you basically build your competitiveness on having massive volumes. I would argue OpenAI, for example, is increasingly in that box. It's not entirely clear if they can actually find sustained differential returns, i.e. profit. But that's certainly what they're claiming when they raise money. There can be switching costs. So clearly that's a factor in, let's say, OpenAI. People get used to an interface and they don't like switching. I guess more importantly in enterprise, you can kind of glue your stuff into the customer's solution and it's a pain to remove. If you're a social network, you can have network economy. If you're like a handbag, you can have branding. Process power, that's what NVIDIA has. It's surprisingly hard to make a graphics card. Cornered resource maybe isn't such a big thing in AI because that's like patents and stuff, and I don't believe in that. So different phases of a company's journey have different good sources for power. Initially, the best one is usually called counter positioning, where you do something that the incumbents don't want to do, something that is like messing with their existing business. So for AI, I think that's a lot of the business cases that are available right now, where you have either a services company or some other company that you can essentially take on in a way that is not really in their interest to try. That's, I think, going to be the most common source of disruption of existing companies. You can also maybe have some proprietary data set or something that could in some sense be a cornered resource. But I think really the counter positioning part is going to be the big part. So how do you then translate your willingness to kind of capture value into something? Well, you need a kind of a business model, I guess. So there have emerged now a few different business models in AI. There's model as a service, like the big hyperscaling AI labs. So it's not clear to anyone, not me either, if they will make money and if so, how. The premise is they will become sort of a utility where they have such massive infrastructure that they can provide superior marginal cost for tokens. So basically, even if the LLM itself is a commodity, no one else can serve as many users at such a low cost that these hyperscalers can. And then they can make money. Whether they offset each other, so none of them really make money, it's possible. I think this is a major question that I'm not sure about, that is worth thinking about if you want to build an AI business. I have personally preferred the picks and shovels version. You've heard the analogy of picks and shovels. When everyone is digging for gold, stand there handing out the shovels. Doesn't matter if you find any gold, but you'll make a killing on the shovels. So I like that. It's an infrastructure tooling kind of thing, where if you can provide a an enablement tool or something that helps others succeed, that can give you kind of a little bit less, you don't have to find the perfect application of what you're doing, as long as you can support those that are building and developing applications. And then there's vertical SaaS, which I guess could be called now vertical AI SaaS or whatever. It's all just, you know, made up anyway. I couldn't care less what they call it, actually. One of these things would be Legora, which is a Swedish company. So they are building their business on the premise that there's a relatively homogeneous user group, lawyers, who barely know how to turn on a computer and will be replaced shortly. That's their business model. And then their marketing is about making the lawyers not find out before it's too late. I'm not sure they agree. But this is, I think, quite attractive business, to be honest. I think there will be plenty of these vertical AI kind of service replacement businesses. So the simplest way to build one of those probably is to just find, you know, moderately profitable services companies and make them into AI agents. Whether the market will appreciate talking to agents or not, I think is the experiment you're going to be doing in that case. I'm not 100% sure people actually want that, but if you read business press right now, you could easily think that's the case anyway. The other option is horizontal SaaS, so where you don't take on a very specific use case, but you rather try and do something very broad, like Slack and Notion. Sweden has one example, like Sana. They have a huge competitor, Glean. These companies are more difficult to build because there's usually more competition. It requires more capital, harder to get started in some sense. And also the incumbents, Microsoft and Google, have huge distribution advantages. The last one, I guess, is the one that is now gaining traction, which is selling work through agents. So we touched on this in vertical SaaS, but you could imagine trying to formulate agents that can be paid on success for various tasks. This is, I think, right now where most of the venture money that I can track is being experimented with. There's plenty of ideas here, but it's not clear exactly what works and what doesn't. And I think that's, in some sense, the best area for venture capital and startups, because that's the point. You want to experiment with stuff that isn't clear yet. At the same time, this depends on your risk preference if you want to be in that. I think it's high probability that a lot of these companies will fail, but that's part of the game. So, besides having a business model, you could think about what are the possible advantages you could have as a company taking this on. So one is you could have some sort of data advantage. So I think this one, I obviously am a bit biased. I work with creating data sets essentially for a living. I think this one is huge in that I think models are generally commoditized, to be totally honest. Not to sort of shit on everyone's great models that you present here at Gaia, but like I think it's going to be incredibly hard to get paid for providing a model, unless it's a services thing. Like you can be paid to train a model, but be paid for the model as such, I think is quite difficult. I think what is more likely is that if you can somehow create a flywheel where you generate proprietary data that gives you some ability to make better predictions or more valuable predictions, then that can be valuable. But I distinguish between that and the actual model. The other option, or a other option, is you become sort of an integration hub. So when you look at these companies like Glean and Sana, essentially what they are connectors. So you want to connect all your different data repositories and you want to do RAG on all of it. I'm not 100% sure connectivity and integration is enough actually at this point, because by now Slack, Notion, Google, all of them connect to each other, and you can basically talk to an LLM in all of their UIs. So I don't see why I would should add another one, maybe. Not totally clear to me. That brings us to distribution advantage. So first-time founders think it's about the product, is what I've been told. And I've fallen into this myself. As an engineer and as a first-time entrepreneur, you think it's a product problem. Turns out it's all about distribution, essentially sales. Sales is the single most important factor to success over a longer period of time. Are you able to bring your product to the right users? And the joke is that you have to figure out distribution before incumbents figure out product. So Google and others have distribution. Like they just flipped the switch and I got like RAG on all my documents in Google Drive. I don't need a third party if I get it for free inside Google's work suite. So they have a huge distribution advantage. At the same time, for a long time, their product was kind of shitty. So if you can build enough user base before they figure out the product side, you have a chance. So that's why you got to move very fast with probably shock and awe amounts of money in some cases. But there is like a case for that in some circumstances. So when you look at some of these outsized funding rounds for broader consumer-based AI applications, I think a lot of it is that venture investors expect to need a huge amount of money to for distribution. The last three is you could potentially have some sort of fine-tuning or UX fit that is superior. Again, that is probably a weak defense over time because UXs are easier to copy, but it compounds. So if you're vertically adapted and you have a lot of clever integrations and features, like I can imagine there's plenty of AI business opportunities that need to be built still. You could do something about latency or cost. DeepSeek is famous for putting the whole cost equation on its head recently. You could also do, in enterprise, you can always do things for like risk management and privacy and so forth. There's enough lawyers to make demand for that. But ultimately, there's kind of a trade-off between vertical and horizontal. There's something called the bitter lesson that I wanted to mention also. Most of you have probably heard of it. It's that from 70 years of AI research, general methods that leverage computations are ultimately the most effective by a large margin. So Sutton basically complained that all his fancy theories that he came up with were constantly being beat by people who just bought more GPUs. And that's mostly true. I mean, there's really no point in trying to be fancy about things anymore. It's just connectionism and huge amounts of compute. How can we relate this to businesses? Well, this is a very difficult to understand graph that I like, obviously. So the idea is that there's time here on this axis, and there is product performance. So if you do a vertical AI product, you could imagine that it's going to be quite a lot better early on. The danger is that there comes a point where the underlying like LLM or something suddenly can satisfy the need. So basically all your hard work in vertically specializing AI to some use case is suddenly wiped out by an upgrade to the LLM. This, I think, is the most difficult business problem for AI companies right now, is how do you balance the value of vertical integration versus the probability that underlying models will just wipe you out? Because that makes investing very scary. It basically means you don't know if you can make money after a while. So I'm coming up on time. Besides the obvious of sort of asking people about problems and picking something that is in that triangle of interesting stuff, I think capturing value, you have to think very, very carefully about sort of what the sources are that you could leverage. Is it data advantage, integration, distribution? I think that's my time. I hope you learned something about what you need to think about when building a business.
Thank you, Daniel, so much. Thank you so much. Truly inspiring presentation. We are going to open up the room right now for anyone that is curious to ask a question. And let's start right here in the front.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation, and I really love how you separated the data and the model. But I'm thinking, can you say something about sort of say adversarial learning? What can somebody learn from those models, even though your data is proprietary? And how does that affect your proprietary data down the line? If I start to learn how to reproduce the data from the model.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about having the flywheel running all the time. I mean, the only defense today in business is to just always be faster. Like whatever you built is going to be old in 3 months. So just don't stop building. I mean, if you think you can make money from something for an extended period of time, you're probably wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we can take the gentleman just behind you there.
So, hi, thanks for your presentation. I was listening to you in this AI Swedish podcast, and you more or less killed the LLMs when they were new. What changed your mind?
I did, didn't I? I mean, I still think there are some pretty major limitations to how far we can take the LLM paradigm when it comes to general purpose intelligence. I'm more of a Jan LeCun believer than perhaps Sam Altman. Like there's an issue with the autoregressive nature of the models and how they compound or perpetuate errors that they can't recover from. I guess what I'm, the black swans are the innovations that are made that you can't predict. I did not anticipate quite as much progress on chain of thought, post-inference, and how much you could do with that. And that's clearly where most of the performance scaling is coming now. And who knows, maybe there are 5 more of those that's going to keep the train going for another 5 years. But I don't think the current paradigm of LLMs still will converge on general purpose intelligence, the way we think of it anyway. So in that sense, I haven't changed. But
thank you. Let's take you in the back, in the center, down there. Yeah, the guy who has his hand raised.
Hi, thank you for this interesting talk. I mean, I have a question, like this distribution and integration point that you pointed out. For new companies that have a product, let's say I want to sell a shovel, the clients require too much of customization, and then it becomes like a consultancy. And then you fall into the trap that you cannot scale. So how do you get out of that? I mean, because your clients will always ask for a sticker or something else onto your shovel, and then you
get a Franken shovel. I mean, partly you in enterprise, there's always going to be a bunch of stickers on the shovel, I think. I mean, you're never going to get away from that entirely. If it's a consumer application, you don't have a choice. You just have to find lots of small users that pay a little each. The bigger the users, the more you probably need to compromise. The bigger the customer accounts. Like we're in whale hunting, doing extremely large deals. We do a lot of what people ask us to do. It's just pragmatic. You know, what's the trade-off between closing versus having integrity? It's solved in financial space.
Just a follow-up. I mean, follow-up question. Maybe it's not connected, but what is your take on a developer-focused tooling product versus enterprise product that you have? I mean, I'm assuming like it's not individual.
I don't understand the question.
I mean, if you intend to be a first-time entrepreneur, is it not easier to make a consumer product like a developer product? Let's say a coding agent or something that's been very popular instead of something which is targeting the enterprises.
I mean, I don't think any businesses are particularly easy.
Okay.
That's at least not my experience. Not if they're valuable. So I think it's all kind of hard. There are pros and cons with all of them. If you're in enterprise, you can talk to people over some period of time and reason about requirements and make some joint investment decisions and so forth. That's nice. I like that. I'm an enterprise guy. I probably couldn't do a consumer thing. I've invested in a few consumer AI companies like Lovable, and I have no idea how that works. I just look at the graph go up and to the right, and I'm happy. But like, I have no idea how it works. It seems to be a lot about being viral, which I understand nothing about.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Daniel, for coming, and thanks for answering all the questions.
Thank you.
Tackar.